I will try to be as brief as I can. So thanks everybody for being here. Thanks Daria for the introduction. I will talk about the work that the ILO has done and the work that the ILO is doing regarding local and regional government workers. So we'll start with what brings us here, which is the trade union issues. And we start with the freedom of association. There is several different conventions that apply to local and regional government workers. But the most important tool is to establish the distinction between the collective bargaining convention and the labor relations in the public service convention. That's Convention 98 of 1949 and Convention 151 from 1978. Convention 98 stated that it doesn't deal with the situation of public servants engaged in the administration of the state. But since then, the Committee of Experts and the Committee of Freedom of Association of the ILO, which are our supervisory bodies, have clarified that local and regional government workers are mostly covered by Convention 98, which means that they should be entitled to not only join trade unions, but also participate in collective bargaining and even have the right to strike because they are not public servants engaged in the administration of the state. Then almost 30 years later, Convention 151 was adopted to address the gaps left by Convention 98 regarding public servants. And while the issue around collective bargaining is not one of them, there are other issues that are covered by Convention 151, such as the facilities afforded to public servant organizations, the dispute resolution mechanisms in cases of impasse in negotiations, and the protection of civil and political rights. So for that, I invite you to take a look at the convention. But there is some distinctions between LRG workers and national government workers, which is the source of funding. And also because the member states tend to impose taxes on different things at the national level, at the local level. It's also a very different issue, and this I'm preaching to the choir here, because the type of politician that is at the head of the local governments and at the national level are completely different. And sometimes the local government officials are the ones that control the political parties. They have huge resistance to allowing workers to engage in collective bargaining, etc. As a result, we have different types of union membership and different types of union activity at the national level and at the local level. In my country, Puerto Rico, the local government workers were the first ones to engage in strikes. The national government workers took much longer to start engaging in strike, and since then, they still engage in strikes and in collective activities, much less than local government workers. In the ILO, we have the irony that we have, it's a tripartite organization. We have representation of workers, governments, and employers, but subnational governments are not considered either national governments that are represented in the ILO, nor employers. So they fall between the cracks because they are not considered either one of the groups, and then they usually then need to participate in the ILO as part of the government when the governments are normally here as regulators of labor relations. So it's kind of outside of their field. And this is something that PSI has brought to the ILO several times without an obvious solution. The ILO had, as detailed in the brief that you received before the meeting, in 2001 was the last time that we had a meeting on the impact of decentralization and privatization on municipal services. The meeting recommended that the ILO should design and implement an action program, including sub-regional, regional, and national activities, dedicated to promote social dialogue at all levels in the context of public service reform. That was done later, but it was in the context of water and electric supply services in Nigeria, Malawi, Peru, and the Philippines. In the Philippines, in fact, it led to the ratification of Convention 151 just recently in 2017, and that was the first country in the ILO's regional for Asia and the Pacific to do so. In addition, more recently, we have developed some working papers on non-standard work in the public service, which paid attention to municipal workers, and at least the one on Europe in the UK was cited in the brief that you received. In Japan, actually, it focused only on municipal workers. So that's an interesting work that you should read. They are available online. And now, even more recently, we have engaged in some research on the working conditions of subnational workers. We have already done the work on Latin America. In Africa, they're both going to be published very soon. We are currently doing it on Europe, and we expect to be doing it in the Asian region in the near future. So this research seeks to develop the first comprehensive global analysis on the working conditions of subnational government workers. It seeks to fill the gap in the research that after the 2001 meeting, which focused then on local utilities afterwards, and it was requested by PSI in the advisory body session of January 2019. So the countries in Africa are Cameroon, Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, Mozambique, and South Africa. In Latin America, we focused on Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, and Peru. And now I'll present briefly what we have found. Is that it's like Daria said, the role of subnational workers in the delivery of public services has become increasingly crucial, especially in the wake of climate change, global pandemics, and the need for sustainable development. But then, as in 2001, we still find the main trend to be the political, fiscal, and administrative decentralization, which involves changes in authority, in the autonomy, the accountability, and the capacity of the subnational governments. So the local and regional governments have a direct role in achieving many SDGs. The SDG on health, the SDG on education, the SDG on water and sanitation, the SDG on economic growth and decent work, the SDG on infrastructure, the SDG on inclusive cities and human settlement, the SDG on climate change, the SDG on conserving marine, even ocean, seas, and marine resources, and the SDG on terrestrial ecosystems. For that, all kinds of subnational workers are essential. And without the workers, without their input, without their work, it's going to be impossible to advance the goals. So at the sub-regional in South Africa, at the subnational level, we have many activities that are being carried out by provinces and districts, and not so much the local governments in the areas of general administration, education, public health, housing, and town planning. So what was found is that local governments were more focused on local administration rather than on these other activities. Now, regarding the institutional frameworks in Africa, we found that in most countries, most public administration personnel are governed by a career system embodied in the public service. That is also true in Latin America. Then the labor codes contain supplementary provisions. In many African countries, the status of local staff is determined by local government legislation. The status of local staff is determined then by local government acts. But in Cameroon, for example, local government staff is subject to employment contracts as in the private sector. And the Committee of Experts on of the ILO has stated that this is a serious concern because it undermines the independence of the public service. And central governments can avail senior executives of the territorial administration to the national governments whose status then falls under the central government's public service. In those cases, then we have in the local and regional governments, people who are in both the local government service and the central government service. So outsourcing continues to be a problem. In Africa, it has been security services, computer science, communication, catering, maintenance of administrative premises, and even HR, human resource management, including recruitment, payroll, or transportation of personnel. So the challenges are that there is inadequate service delivery, limited data and research, limited financial and human capacity and personnel turnover, partial decentralization and weak horizontal and vertical coordination, weak governance and accountability structures, weak decentralization and constitutional protection, high levels of corruption, and lack of capacity and institutional framework. Fortunately, the African Municipal and Local Government Union Network has provided a platform from which best practices can be learned, as well as serve as a vital intellectual resource for the development of an alternative to austerity and neoliberalism. Now, in Latin America, we have similar challenges, but then there are two distinct models, the unitary and the federal. The ones that are federal regulate the subnational government employment in more detail and provide more statistics, but they are very complex to study because there are many, many municipalities, many local government entities that each have their own regimes, even though they're more regulated. Then most public employment is in subnational governments, which is a trend strengthened by decentralization. But then the weight of the public employment in local administration is increasing steadily within the subnational governments, especially in the second level, depending on the domination of each country by reason of the transfer of personnel from the national government and the significant increase in the hiring of public personnel. And there's a significant concentration of staff in the education and health sectors. In income, we have a large gap, both in terms of gender and in terms of the national versus subnational government, in which the national government pays more, and the training is concentrated on career staff. So the increasing number of public employees that are under contract are not favored by many of the benefits that are for career staff. And I will wrap up in just 1 minute because I imagine the tomato is going around. But the situation of collective rights in this group of workers is very contradictory. On the one hand, most national legislation recognizes the right to organize, to bargain collectively and strike, as it is embodied with one density union superior to the private industry. On the other hand, the rules pose legal obstacle to the exercise of the right to collective bargaining and the right to strike, which is plotted in one low number of agreements in the local governments and high levels of conflict. It's also reflected in the pronouncements issued by the supervisory bodies. So with that, I will wrap up and I remain available for any questions. Thank you very much.